In this video, I want to talk about charts and chart symbols. I'm going to be looking at a chart from this Estonian book. It's one of the stitch libraries that I own that I really like, and you can see that I use it a lot. It's falling apart. And I want to look at this motif here. It's a lovely little flower, and this is how it's charted. This is a typical type of Estonian chart. These symbols are used in Europe, in other countries as well. And just wanted to show you what it looks like. We're not going to knit from this because this is not the kind of charts that we're used to seeing in English language publications, but I want you to see what it looked like. Now I'm going to show you the version that we would be knitting from, which I redid myself using charting software. So I've got the same basic setup here. The reason I showed you that is because I made this chart be in the same organization as the other chart. Can you see how it's the same shape and things are lined up in the same way? When you make knitting charts, there are many different ways and choices you can have for how to line up the stitches and how to organize the chart, especially in a chart like this where every round has a different number of stitches because we're increasing from the center out on a project. And so the reason this chart is set up the way it is because I took it from an Estonian source, and I didn't want to change it too much because I could knit from it in the Estonian source, and this worked just fine for me without making more drastic changes to it. I just changed to have a grid, and I put the symbols in that we're used to seeing. So the blank symbols on this chart are plain knit stitches, and there are plain rounds knit between each of the rounds on the chart, but I haven't included them, and you can tell they're not included because the numbers that go up here are just odd. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and that's also because the Estonian chart was done that way, and so I wanted to keep this as close to that as possible. So every round of this chart you're going to read from right to left. You start reading the chart where the number is. Because we're going in the round, we never turn our knitting and go backwards in the other direction, so we never do that on the chart. So that's the first thing you have to know. So the plain squares are just knits, and they're blank, and that makes it easier to see what else is going on. I just want to go over a few of the other symbols here for you to help you learn how to read charts in a more relaxed way, perhaps. So yarn over is with an O, and that's meant to look like a circle or a hole because a yarn over makes a hole in your knitting. So I think that's pretty easy to understand. We have these two symbols that I've used here for a knit two together through the back loop, which sometimes is a symbol for SSK. Those are both left slanting decreases, and I used this for knit two together. I'm slowly transitioning to having this extra line on my decrease symbols as I make things. I used to think it was messy and just extra lines when I saw charts that had symbols like this. But if you ever see these, this is what it means. It means you have 2 stitches to start with and you end up with 1 stitch and you're making a left slanting decrease. So that would be SSK or knit 2 together through the back loop. Those are interchangeable. They're a little bit different in the final result, but they both make a left slanting decrease. To be honest, I used this one in the project with this chart because I was using hand-painted yarn and it didn't really show up enough to make a difference to me. But the visual difference might be important to some of you, so you might want to swatch with both and see what you like. Anyway, coming back here, we have 2 stitches decreasing to 1, slants to the right, and that just knit 2 together. So both of these start with 2, end up with 1, but the slant is different. So those are here. Then we have this one, knit front and back. It's an increase. And so for the symbol, I started with 1 stitch and went to 2. Kind of the opposite of that. Then we have a double decrease, which takes 3 stitches and decreases it to 1 and slants to the left. And for this, it's slip 1, knit 2 together, pass the slip stitch over. And when you make that, you'll see it slants to the left. But you started with 3 stitches, you end up with 1. And then I have this yarn over twice. And if you look in this chart, you'll see right here, it's got the little yarn over twice symbol, but in other places it just has two yarn overs next to each other. Those are both the same, and it means yarn over, yarn over. And why did I chart it in two different ways? Again, I'm going to give you a cop-out. I did it that way because that's how the original chart was, and I didn't want to mess with the alignment and arrangement of the chart. So I just did it the same way the original designer did, who made up this stitch that put it in the stitch library. So that's what that is. And then the last symbol that we have on this chart, it looks like this, and it's knit through the back loop. Just knit one stitch through the back loop, and that's meant to look like a stitch that has its legs crossed, because a regular knit stitch, when you're finished with it, looks like that, kind of like a V. The two pieces of the stitch just come together like a V. But when you make a stitch that you knit through the back loop, it becomes crossed, and the finished stitch looks like that, like a little X. So that is supposed to be represented in this. And the first time I showed someone this symbol in a class I taught, they said, oh, the stitch has its legs crossed because it has to go potty. And I hope that will stick in your mind as much as it stuck in my mind, and you'll never forget that symbol. So that's just a quick overview of the symbols that are used in this chart. And I hope that they help you remember what they mean, because they're not just arbitrary symbols. They're kind of like a secret code.